Good afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name's Eileen Burke and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. Our lecture today is sponsored by the Preservation Association of Lincoln. If you're interested in these programs, please join our membership. Our membership is available online at preservelincoln.org. Our speaker today is Bob Ripley. Bob is the Capitol Administrator for the Office of the Capitol Commission at the Nebraska State Capitol Building. Bob is native of Lincoln, Nebraska, and a graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln College of Architecture with a bachelor's degree in architecture in 1972. He holds both Nebraska and national architectural licenses. Bob had been in private practice of architecture in Lincoln until taking the position at the Capitol in 1983. And then again from 97 through 2000. He also served as historic preservation consultant for Phase 3 of the Washington Monument Restoration in Washington, D.C. for the project-sponsored Target stores of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Bob's talk today is titled The Nebraska State Capitol Courtyard Fountain Project. Please join me in welcoming Bob Ripley.
Thank you, Eileen, for that very kind introduction. I want to thank all of you for being here today and for your ongoing support, as I hear from time to time, for the work we do at the Capitol. It is very reassuring when people call and say, we appreciate the work you're doing, we like the project you're up to, and it's one of my great pleasures to be able to kind of bring that information to you in programs like this. I want to thank my friend and colleague Roxanne Smith at the Capitol for helping me put together this PowerPoint presentation today. And I will go through my slides. I probably have a few more than I might have put into the program, but a few more is not too bad. I can always hit the advance more quickly. The slide I'm going to begin with today is as good an historic reference to where the project has been and where the courtyards have been up till this point. And this is a roughly 1940 photograph of the courtyards. As you can see, they were landscaped, and this is very much akin to what we would ultimately like to restore the Capitol landscape, or the courtyard landscape to. But as you can see, missing one very primary feature at the very center of the photograph, the courtyard fountains. The Goodhue Associates didn't leave this element out of the project. The state chose to leave it out at the very conclusion of the building's initial construction in 1932 because of the economic times of the Depression. It was not only the 4 courtyard fountains left unfinished, but 20 murals on the interior of the building, which have all been completed now, beginning in about 1953 through 1996, when the Memorial Chamber, 8 murals were dedicated for the Memorial Chamber at the top of the Capitol. Something you should note and you should be aware of, because once you see the fountains in operation, you can appreciate the intent of the Goodhue Associates, because Goodhue died in 1924. It was in 1934 that the Associates developed this concept for the fountain based on Goodhue's premise of what he wanted to do with water in the courtyards. Goodhue had a very restrained approach to the use of water, especially fountains. He was not a big fan of, say, the Trevi Fountain or others that threw hundreds of gallons of water in the air. He had traveled extensively in the Middle East, and then what was known as Mesopotamia or Persia. He'd seen the very restrained use of water in fountains there, and he greatly appreciated that kind of use of water as a subtle design element. And therefore, he never intended his fountains to be aerial displays of how far you can throw water, or that they might dance in a circle or in any particular pattern. They were intended to be more of an artesian well, that water was a very valuable commodity in an agricultural environment, and he wanted it to be respected like that, and therefore the fountain's function is a more respectful and a bit more restrained than the average person might expect in a fountain design. However, this was the bowl and ultimately the basin that the firm created for the future and now existing courtyard fountains. This is a sketch that was done in the 1980s, to simply give people a little bit of an idea of the scale of this fountain relative to a human figure. This figure just happens to be 6'4", to give you some relative space. I draw all human figures at 6'4", so I have a little warped perspective to things, but 6'4" also gives you a horizontal eye line at 6 feet above the ground, so it gives you a little bit of an idea of what a human looks like standing next to it. And in addition, before we started this project in an attempt to build support for it, we commissioned a gentleman from Omaha by the name of John Peterson to produce this rendering of what the fountain would look like in a courtyard that had a representation of the building in the background and the landscaping to go with it. It was in fact 10 years later, this is about a 2004 rendering, about 10 years later, the legislature appropriated the money through the kind support of the former legislators. I need to give a plug to my good friends who are members of the former legislators. If you want something to get through a legislative body, there's nothing finer than having a group of people whose name is former legislators, who have a PhD in how to get things through that process, and it is indeed their kind support is the whole reason this project came to fruition. They were able to get the appropriation through the legislature. It was a kind of a two-step process, and I'll leave it at that, but their organizational skills and their dedication to this project cannot be overstated, and I want to thank them on behalf of all Nebraskans for getting that work done. In addition, one of the things I'm going to recommend, and in 2015, this is a reference to what the courtyards used to look like just before we started construction. And in 2014, I believe the session was, there was a sum of money appropriated and ultimately augmented with an additional $300,000 of residual construction money that was there to create a budget of $3.1 million to create 3 fountains. That's a little over, it's about $775,000 per fountain. And I'll give you an idea of what that money buys, and it isn't just what you see on the surface of the courtyard. The successful bidder on the project was Kingery Construction Company of Lincoln, and they have done a lot of work at the Capitol. We were delighted with their work through the course of the project. And I also want to acknowledge Barvermeer and Hecker, the architects for the project, Alvine Engineering, the mechanical electrical engineers. Roy Euchre's office was the office that did the structural work, and Water Lines, an organization from Texas, was the fountain consultant. Now, once the bids were taken and the project was underway, Kingery had the first task, which they're all very familiar with, and that is protecting the interior of the Capitol. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to build a fountain in a courtyard, my recommendation is do it while you're building the building. It is a far simpler process. It's a bit like building a boat in a bottle, and therefore you have to protect the entire path from the exterior of the building to the 4 courtyards to get the work done. It adds a challenge, to say the least. This is the process used with a layer of carpet on the floor, 2 layers of half-inch material, kind of a curb along the edge, and we've used it many times, which allows passage of material without damaging the finishes of the building. In addition, we protect the walls, as you see here, come around the corner. When it gets tight and restricted, we're going to remove construction equipment through this area, and we want absolutely no damage to the building in the process. In addition, the first process, we started this in January and February of last year, a great time to start an outdoor project. And what we did was take up material we were going to salvage and reuse. What you're seeing taken up here are the black and white, essentially purple slate and white marble checkerboard borders that the original material that first paved the courtyard walks was leftover or salvage material from the rotunda floor of the second state capitol, the one that precedes this current Goodhue building. In addition, the red flagstone that formed the body of the walk was the public sidewalk around the Capitol that dates prior to this in the late 1880s. So that salvage material was reused in a couple locations on the site, most specifically in the courtyard itself. Now, in addition to coming into a very tight building, you need to use very small construction equipment. This is a small backhoe, and it looks like one you could pick up and put in the bed of a pickup truck. I've never tried that, but it is a very effective piece of machinery, as are bobcats and all the kind of miniaturized construction equipment you see today. For Courtyard fountains, it was custom made. And so you see the work underway here. We're digging the foundation pit for a vault that will go under the fountain. And there is access under the fountain for ongoing maintenance and repair of the system and the Courtyard fountains over time. Well, in addition, that small equipment digs up surprises in the courtyard. And this is the southwest courtyard. And this is about a 5 foot wide. And you notice here there's a brick floor, and there's about a 3 to 4 foot tall brick wall. That was a steam tunnel that, again, dates back to the second Capitol, where there was an on-site steam plant. All the utilities to the Capitol today are brought in underground from some distance away. During the 1880s, they simply had a steam plant built on the south lawn of the Capitol near the public sidewalk, just west of the ramps that go to the basement, basically kind of across the street from the governor's residence. A tall chimney there, and so on. And there was an underground tunnel that bore the steam lines into the second Capitol, and this is a remnant that they failed to remove. As I said to Kingring when they discovered it, I said, I don't think we can probably get a credit from the previous contractor who left this eyesore in place. It was an interesting historic relic, and we were able to kind of take photographs and get documentation of something we otherwise had no idea existed. In addition, the northeast courtyard had its share of surprises as well. And I think right here is my friend and colleague, Mr. Hansen, Matt Hansen, who, once they discovered a cache of about 50 pieces of limestone, which was face material from the second state capitol, discovered in the northwest courtyard, Matt went down and gathered it all up. 5 of those pieces have some nice molding set into them, so they're nice relics for our office to have, but they are of the stone that clad the previous building. And you'll notice it's about 3 feet underground, which is consistent with what the original specifications for our current capitol required, because once the building was completed, the site plan called for installation of a 3-foot layer of topsoil so that the landscaping that would be put in place on the new building had a very good planting bed instead of one festooned with rubble, brick, and other sorts of material. It was a little bit of an easy way out for the contractor. He didn't have to be quite so tidy at the end of the project and clean up every bit of debris. In this case, we were able to get some salvage that, frankly, we were kind of glad to have in our collection. And here you see that layer of stone that was put in place. We think it might have been used as a shim, but it gives you kind of a close-up of what we had to do digging them out of the wall. It's a bit like a mining operation, but Matt was up to the task, and we have all those stones in place in our archive. This is a cross-section through the entire core of the fountain itself. You can see the bowl at the very top. This is an opening right here through a concrete yoke or base, and this creates a basin on each side with a concrete curb, and this vault beneath it is where all of the infrastructure that comes through a tube from the basement of the Capitol out to this small secondary basement. All of that equipment comes in and is connected to the fountain beneath the bowl. It's all out there, you just can't see it. In addition, this is what it looked like once it was initially cast in place. Right here is the walkway, of course, the base to the walkway around the fountain. This is actually green concrete, not meaning to be new concrete, but actually the color green. We did that to try to mute its grayness against the color of what the fountain would eventually be in color. And you'll notice there's some ports around the perimeter for ventilation, and this is the recess which will eventually form the basin around the base of the fountain itself. And of course, the open top here is where the bowl will ultimately sit. This shows a look into that vault from above. Looking down, you can see some of the fittings that were cast into the concrete. And right here is that 18-inch diameter plastic pipe, 1-inch wall thickness, that came from the basement of the Capitol out to this vault under the fountains, carrying all of our infrastructure to and from that fountain. Our intention being that if we have to do repair to this infrastructure at some point in the future, which I think it's realistic to do, we have a way of being able to pull that material out through the basement and feed new material in without having to go out necessarily tearing up the entire landscape in the courtyard to affect that repair. So this was put in place as a measure to try to mitigate future maintenance and lower the costs and make it simpler and less destructive in the process. And this is just another view standing where the hatch to this basement vault under the fountain is located, looking straight back at this carrier pipe with all of the infrastructure stubbed out of the end, waiting for the fountain to arrive. Speaking of the fountain arriving, here we are. We are now at March of this year. The fountain bowls themselves have come in. The infrastructure put in place in preparation for them was done by Shanahan Plumbing and Wilmar Electrical from Lincoln, and they put all that material. It was ready when these bowls arrived. And these bowls, two of which you see here, have a collar on the inside stored on the interior as they were shipped. These bronze bowls weigh around 1,800 pounds apiece. They are welded or brazed together. The bowls themselves are composed of 28 separate pieces of bronze, cast or separate items, brazed together into a single unit forming a bowl. The interior within this, you can see just beyond the rim of the bowl, you can see a collar which was composed of 8 pieces welded or brazed together and finished, as you see here, and those form a collar that sit below the bowl itself. That's an 800-pound ring of bronze. Takes some serious intelligence to move things like that without injuring people or damaging property. And our contractor for that purpose was Davis Erection of Lincoln. All of this bronze casting was produced by a gentleman named Stan Watts and his company, Atlas Bronze Works, in Salt Lake City, Utah. They were the low bidder on the project and really did an excellent job of the casting and welding of these bowls. So here we are, lifting one of those light little nearly 1-ton bowls in the air, and Davis Erection has them put in place, and they're going to be put into, here they're carrying the ring or the collar that goes below the bowl, but Davis actually made a custom cart on which we could place these roughly 1-ton bowls and easily wheel them up to the ground floor north entrance of the Capitol. That's under the porte cochere, or the covered entrance of the Capitol. It's the easiest driveway access to the ground floor of the building, and it was the easiest place for us to shuttle material in and out of the building for the purpose of the project. And it's great to have people who make moving very heavy things look very easy, and I compliment them on the good work they did with absolutely not a bit of damage to either the fountains or the building in the process. Here you're seeing one of those bowls picked up and set down on a couple of skids in the courtyard proper, but look beyond it and you can see the collar I was referencing, and it's sitting down, providing kind of a ring or a cap around the top of the concrete pedestal, which is around the hole that drops into the vault below the fountain. In addition, picked that bruiser up, and we had a beam system, and kind of a gantry, and a chain come along, which easily lifted the weight of that 1-ton bowl, moving it over to sit it in place on top of the collar. Notice as well, behind the collar, this collar does not fit tightly against the concrete. There's about a 1/2 to 3/4 inch space around that, and that's to allow for ventilation. These are ports in the perimeter behind the bronze which allow air to ventilate so that we don't end up creating a very sweaty, smelly, almost swamp-like atmosphere in the vault beneath the fountains. So there's some ventilation in there to make it a reasonable place to work and to keep the space reasonably clean. As well, you'll notice right here, right over here, are brackets which were used to adjust the level condition of the bowl. You'll see in a moment why the bowl being level was critical. We told the foundry that when they were producing them. We said, we want to be able to set a laser down on top of the rim of that bowl, and we want it just dead level all the way around, because the function we wanted for the fountain required such accuracy. And indeed, they provided that. So this bowl is being put in place, and then ultimately through the access hatch in the perimeter, you go into the underside and adjust the stainless steel bolts that level the bowl and have it prepared for full operation. Now, bowl's going down. Looks like Matt Hansen got a little hand in the process. This gentleman right here is Craig Anderson, although you're not getting his best side, was superintendent of the work on the entire project from start to finish. He did just an absolutely excellent job, and we're really delighted with Kingery and all the subcontractors' work on this project. Bowl and collar being set, bowl being leveled. Once we had it in place, this is pretty much what it looks like. These are ports down here, or drains, which are used for recirculating the water that's within the system. Bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, each one of these fountains has its own separate filter system. It's like 4 separate swimming pools. There's 4 separate rooms in the basement off of each courtyard, and each one is provided to that unique bowl. That's where the real money is. There is 85 to 90% of the cost of this project was not only the digging, but it was the foundations, it was the infrastructure, it's the filter systems. That's where the real money went. That's where the iceberg is, below the surface. What you see at the surface, what we enjoy every day, that everyone thinks, gee, it costs that much for one of those fountains. Well, it does, but the fountain proper that you look at is 10% of the total cost of $3 million. That's what the total cost of the fountains, in fact, was. Now, here's another view. If you drop down through the maintenance access pit, drop to the floor, there's the carrier pipe and the infrastructure hooked to the bottom of that bowl. One more shot, because I think this kind of stuff looks nice when it's so well installed, and it also functions extremely well. And so you see all the pipes and all the apparatus it takes, stainless steel fittings, all cast into concrete and so on. We used the best possible materials we could. We used Schedule 80 pipe, which is twice the normal wall thickness of pipe, to make sure that we had the best quality materials in place for the greatest longevity and the lowest overall operational cost. It's worth spending additional money for better quality materials to begin with, because our experience has taught us over time it really pays off. Don't go on the cheap to start with. Invest in better quality to begin with, and it will pay dividends. And as most of you likely remember, the cost of things don't tend to go down over time. And so the more time goes by, the more money is typically saved with inflation. And here's one of those 4 mechanical rooms in the basement. It's a filter system, it has a chlorination system, it is operated essentially like a swimming pool, and it works extremely well and has been very effective for our work and the shakedown that we've done on these fountains. They were put in place, they were operated for 30 days to pass muster with the specification before any other work was attempted on them. So we know that they do in fact operate as they were specified. In addition, there's some of that salvage material we talked about earlier. And what you see here is the process of sorting through the material that's still salvageable. Much of it was. And right here, this gentleman right here down on his knees is a gentleman by the name of Irv Wemhoff, who is an employee of Cornhusker Tile and Marble, who with his crew, as you see in the background, reset the borders, which are the checkerboard material, as well as checkerboard that will eventually be on the walk here, and his colleagues are putting in the flagstone beyond. It's a deeper recess in the concrete here because the thickness of that red flagstone varies. So the bed under it has to be varied in height. So it was a greater depth there, and it's much shallower here because these are cut pieces of stone, a nominal 3/4 of an inch in thickness. So they were more of kind of buttering the mortar and setting them in place. In addition, DeMarco Brothers out of Omaha was the contractor subcontractor to install the granite curb. This happens to be, and I don't know whether the photo here doesn't lend your, well, right here it does. You'll notice right here is a piece of granite. Where the capital meets the ground in every instance, it sits on a bed course of granite, because granite is incredibly dense. It is very hard and will not absorb moisture. And so the wise thing to do anytime you have moisture up against stone is to pick something that's very durable over time, and granite was the perfect choice. And so we used exactly the same kind of granite that you see here that they used in the 1920s. We use the same diamond pink granite here to form the curb that goes around it. Each one of these little pieces of stone is about 700 pounds a piece. They are beautiful pieces. They were wonderfully finished, but I got to tell you something. They're incredibly difficult to move, and there is no neat handle on them. They don't come with a package where they're easy to shift around. And so hiring top-notch people who do it with ease and make it look easy is the only way to go. And so DeMarco came to Lincoln, did that setting. There were 8 of these that ring each fountain and form the edge to the basin from which the water will overflow the rim of the bowl and collect in the basin below. And here you see more of the tile setters at work, more Cornhusker work. You can see the curbs have been completed. The walks themselves are being reset, and Irv and his crew are in the process. You can see them mixing the mortar here and putting all the tile back in place. When the finishes go down, you start getting excited about a building, because until then it's just a whole bunch of pipes and tubes and concrete sticking out of the ground. When you start seeing the finished material go down is when the enthusiasm level rises considerably on any project. And here we are, the gusher. This is the first attempt when we first flipped the switch on to run water through the system. There was a lot of debris in the filter system that needed to be blown out. There was also as much air in the pipes as there was water, and therefore you get this rather uncontrolled spout, as if a whale is swimming under your fountain. Well, we managed to get this guy on. You can see the water doesn't exactly look like you're swimming in a clear pool, and so we got it on. We were getting ready to fill the entire process, and then we worked a little more, and we kind of got this spout under control. Here our project team is standing around outside kind of discussing how we ultimately want this thing to work. And then we managed to finally tame that spout or bubbler in the middle down to its final form. And this is essentially the look we were going for. Now, it looks a little more chaotic here, but if you come to the Capitol and view it, and I'll tell you about a very important date coming up on it's the 22nd of September for a dedication of these fountains, they'll have a chance to see them firsthand in operation. This is a continuous, although stop-action photographs show tears in the curtain, this is in fact a continuous sheet of water that comes down all the way around the perimeter. It hits in the basin as a continuous sheet. It is not quite so bubbling as you see here. And what we noted about this once it was in place is the water hits in this very consistently, not like this might imply here. This is very early in the project. And when it hits in such a continuous sheet, if you've ever watched a diver enter the water and what they call rip the entry, I mean it just goes perfectly vertical, there are very few bubbles. There's no splash, it's just bubbles. The same thing happens with this, where a person can walk up to the edge of the fountain when the wind isn't blowing, of course, and you can stand right next to the fountain and water doesn't splash out of the basin onto your shoes. Keeps water in the bowl and not out on the pavement where you don't want it. Now, there's a little more of the finished condition. The spout, 12 inches in height, about 8 inches in diameter, more of an artesian well kind of appearance, where water just kind of overflows the rim and into the outer bowl itself. Again, all by design, all intended to be is controlled with regard to the use of water, as you can imagine. Now, in addition, the view you get sitting in a bench, that's the elevation you'll see, and benches would be around the perimeter. It puts a nice background white noise into the courtyards where you can talk to your neighbor on the bench and still hear the water as kind of an amenity in the background. And this shows our spout in the center. largely under control. It never looks as neat in a still photograph as it does when you're sitting in the courtyard watching the water run. In addition, this shows the bowl itself and the water cascading over the weir or the rim of the bowl. That's more controlled. This is about a 1/4 inch thickness of water that runs over the rim, drops into the basin at the perimeter, and very little water makes it beyond the curb out onto the pavement. The effect that we were hoping to achieve has been very successful, I must say, and I'm really delighted with the final result. Now, one of the things we've done that was an expansion of the Goodhue design, and that is, this is one of 8 diamonds, if you will, cast into the face of the bronze bowl. This is an icon, one of 8, that is a representation of the Native American symbol for water. There are 8 separate symbols there because Native Americans didn't have one textbook for icons nor for language. They spoke different languages, and so we chose 8 icons that were the closest to being indigenous to this region of the country and to Nebraska itself, and they are cast, all 8 of those, the same 8 are on all 4 fountains, and they're cast into the perimeter of the fountain as part of the ornamentation. This was not specified by the Goodhue office as something our office chose to do as part of what we believe the Goodhue office would eventually have done had they taken their preliminary design that you saw much earlier in a drawing form, had they gotten it to final form. We felt this is very consistent with their premise on how they wanted to put indigenous material as ornamentation in the building. And here you see our staff reinstalling the bronze doors. These doors were monsters. They had to be taken off. There again, you need people who know what they're doing or people get hurt. And fortunately, our staff does. We brought these doors back up after repairing hardware, and they're getting ready to reinstall them. They're adjusting the pommel hinges here. And there are 2 pairs of these doors into each courtyard, and they're in the process of putting those back in place. They will ultimately need to have finishing work done on them, but their function is as good as it's been in years, because our intention is to have these fountains and these courtyards open to the public whenever the building is open to the public and the weather is nice and the fountains are in operation, that the public can go out and enjoy those outdoor spaces as intended. Here they are fitting into the exterior. And a shot which gives you a little bit of an idea of the process that was used, what it looks like today. We have only turf in these perimeter areas, but when you need something done in the Capitol, we have a great advocacy group, as I mentioned before, the former legislators, whose mission it is now, the self-imposed mission, to go out and raise the money, donation from nurseries of plant material, donations from individuals in terms of dollars, to restore the landscape in the courtyards. That was always the driving force behind the restoration of the courtyards. And whenever someone would pose to me, gee, we need to put these plants back in place, my premise always was, we can't do it until we put the fountains in place. So they took me at my word. The dollars were raised for the fountains. Now the fun begins with regard to the ornamentation and the beauty of landscaping as originally planned. Now this gives you a sense of completion versus the missing part. Now what we're missing is what was originally installed, which was the landscaping. This is a concept sketch that I show you that the Goodhue office provided before the Capitol was even built. This was a suggestion. This is an historic drawing that was a suggestion of the fact that there were going to be interior courtyards in the Capitol. No one knew that because the building hadn't even been begun. And so they wanted to suggest there were going to be outdoor spaces. They put in a fountain just as a gesture to, yes, we want to have some sort of fountain out there, we want to have people there, we want to have plants, and the building will be around it. And this is a person whose face and name every Lincolnite should know. A very unsung hero in our community, whose name was Ernst H. Herminghaus. Herminghaus was the landscape architect for the Nebraska State Capitol. It is his landscape you saw in that previous slide in black and white. And Herminghaus was an enormous talent. He was Nebraska's first professionally trained landscape architect. He was a graduate of Lincoln High. He was a graduate on East Campus in the horticulture program, and right about the time he was getting out of college, just prior to World War I, Harvard University had started the first graduate program in landscape architecture, and the son of a gentleman whose name is golden to landscape architects. I think landscape architects hear music when they hear the name Frederick Law Olmsted. And his son, who was still very vital and very involved in the profession, started this graduate program with his colleagues at Harvard. And Herminghaus was probably a graduate of one of the first 4 or 5 classes taught at Harvard. So he came back here with a real pedigree and knowledge in not only design, but in plant material as well. So know this man. In addition to the Nebraska State Capitol, Pioneers Park, one of his creations. It's no surprise or mistake that there are 3 vistas or allées designed into the trees at Pioneers Park to view the Capitol Tower on the distant skyline. As well, he also designed Woodshire Residential Park south of Lincoln between 17th and 20th and kind of near the south end of the Lincoln Country Club. The man was an enormous talent and created a lot of the finest landscapes and park spaces we enjoy in this city. So I thank him and his incredible documentation of his design, which here's a sketch, kind of a preliminary one, of what he thought the courtyards should look like. His intent was that the exterior landscape on the lawn around the Capitol would be subtle, like the coloration of the building. The building's largely buff Indiana limestone with not a lot of snap or color on the outside, only the gold above the main entrance and the blue tile at the top of the tower, that sort of thing. Very subtle ornamentation and color. The courtyards, the lawn was to be similarly subtle with only fall color. The courtyards to reflect what happened when you walked in the building. Once you get inside the Capitol, the array of color and pattern and tile and various materials just kind of erupts. He wanted the same thing to happen with the courtyards because they were to be the flower gardens of the Capitol. And that's indeed what he ultimately created in this one of the 4 landscape plans for the Capitol courtyards. This stuff is documented. We've got numbers of plants, we've got spacing of plants, we've got it all nailed down. This is a specification that could be Xeroxed off today and sent out and bid without any trouble. This is what will guide us with our dear friends, the former legislators, in the process of restoring the courtyards in the Capitol. And you wouldn't know this without seeing the other 3 plans, but not every courtyard is landscaped in the same color scheme or exactly the same plants and materials. There is a color variation one courtyard to the next. In addition, something that needs to be known, in addition, it's, as well as the former legislators raising money for the courtyards, we've had a very kind anonymous donor come forward to provide the funding necessary to install colored glass tile in the bowls of the 4 fountains. And we are delighted with this donation. If the donor would let me, I'd tell you exactly who they are and I'd give them the greatest plug possible, but they are the ones who are supporting getting the tile in place, which will either occur this fall or next spring, depending upon the weather. Now, my last slide. This is an invitation that you may not get in the mail, but you're getting it right now, and it is to the dedication of the courtyard fountains. It will be centered around the northeast courtyard in the building, as long as weather holds. If weather is not cooperative, we'll hold it in the 2nd floor rotunda of the Capitol, and then we'll adjourn toward the end of that ceremony, walk out, if we're inside, to one of the loggias or the porches that overlook the northeast courtyard. And the governor will be the one who has the kind of ultimate pleasure of hitting the keyboard of a tablet or a laptop computer, which will turn the fountains on. The Capitol may look like an old guy, and it is. However, the technology in the Capitol is as current as any building in the region. And so the controls on all that we do and that we'll be doing in the HVAC project are all very much computer operated and very much up to date. Notice the date, the 22nd of September. That is a Friday. We are kicking off kind of a big celebration weekend. This, as you know, is the sesquicentennial of the state. This is our 150th year as an institution. The former legislators wanted this fountain project to be funded so we could celebrate that event by unveiling or dedicating these fountains. In addition, the Sesquicentennial Commission, working with our office, is coordinated with the University of Nebraska. This is homecoming weekend, so to try to maximize the number of people in the city to be able to celebrate the sesquicentennial. And our event at 3 o'clock on the 22nd is the kickoff of that entire weekend of activity. That's one weekend from the coming weekend. So please mark it on your calendar. Please feel free to come down and join in the activities. It won't be a very long ceremony. It'll be short, sweet, and to the point, which is the way I think government ought to operate. So we'll do our best to oblige. Now, I'm going to stop talking, and if there are those who might have a question or two, I'll attempt to answer. Mr. Nelson.
What are the environmental limitations on the operation of the fountains?
Can you give me some more specifics in terms of environmental limitations?
Will you be able to run them throughout the months of February, March?
No. Our intention was always we thought about it. We thought about actually heating the water through the winter, but we really felt we were pushing our luck a little too much. And so what we will do is probably have the fountains operational for about 7 months. We're thinking probably May through October, perhaps into November each year. And the rest of the year, we will close them down, we will cover the bowls, and be able to have them shut off for the winter, if you will, so that the operation of the fountains will, we anticipate, be 7 months during warm weather and close 5 months during the dead of winter. If we keep getting any more warming like we are, we may be able to run them year-round at the rate we're going. But environmentally, that's our intent. We would love to have found a way to do it. It was just too difficult to try to find a way to keep the fountains operational year-round.
Will the bowls rust?
The bowls will not rust. We have an issue right now that the contractor is coming in. The question was, will the bowls rust? No, that's why they were cast of bronze. The core of the fountain is as stable as can be. We had an issue with the material that was used as the finish on the bowls that turned them green, and we've had some residual material in that paint finish that's caused some rust streaking to occur. We've solved that problem in the northeast courtyard by our own staff in-house, and the contractor who supplied the fountains is coming back yet this week and prior to the dedication to address the other 3 fountains that have not yet been addressed. Yes, Bob?
The blue glass, where does it go? Can you show us?
Oh,
The anonymous stuff.
Oh, where the anonymous donors' work will go. Let me back up for a moment. It will essentially, if I can get to the first bowl, let me back up here. Within this greater bowl on the top, the tile will come up to within an inch or two of the weir, and it will start at that point and run down the curved face of the bowl, across the bottom of the bowl to the very center where the jet is located, and they will be festooned or colored or installed with the 4 colors of the Native American medicine wheel, which are red, yellow, blue, and white.
Why are they needed?
Color?
No, not color, but why even the tiles?
Well,
I mean, it seems they'll chip and come loose.
Actually, you ask a very good question. Why the tiles will not chip and come loose, and that was a challenge from the start. When we started construction, we sent some samples of 3/8 inch thick bronze, slabs of bronze, with some special adhesive sealant that we were able to find, with tiles applied to them, sent to a lab in Chicago, and they were tested for 3 months to make sure, and they were run through accelerated weather testing from extreme heat to extreme cold 4 times in an 8-hour period, and it was done for several months to determine what kind of problems we would have getting the tiles to bond to the interior of the bowl, because we weren't going to line the bowls if we didn't have a solution to having them stick and last year to year. And so the issue is this: the bronze will expand and contract with temperature throughout the year. The tile itself will not. And so what our intention is to use an adhesive that will bond the tile to the bowl, spacing the tiles sufficient distance apart that they won't bump into each other as they may expand and contract. And we had sufficient testing done at the lab in Chicago to cover about a 7 to 8 year period, and they experienced very, very minimal issues associated with it. So we feel we have a solution that will work once we get the final proposal and we start the installation, yes.
Well, you answered the second part of my question. The first part was, did Goodhue want those?
I would say they didn't get, in a preliminary sense, far enough along to make that kind of specification. They didn't get far enough along because all they had was a preliminary piece. Did Goodhue respect and appreciate Mosaic Tile? I think if you walk around the Capitol, you can appreciate that he would. And if you stand on second floor, where our donor stood and looked down into the courtyards, the bulk of what you see of the fountain is the interior of the bowl, not the face of the bowl, not anything else. And so it's a very large surface, and one that really we felt in our office needs attention. So we felt it was something that we were taking the next step that likely we felt the Goodhue office would have done anyway. Yes?
So what's the diameter of the fountain? You may have said it and I missed it.
No, I didn't. That's a good question. The diameter of the fountain bowl is just under 8 feet, 7'8". The diameter of the recess, which has the granite curbs that contain the basin around the fountain, is 12 feet in diameter. So
Is there a lighting scheme for it?
there is not.
Okay.
There is no lighting scheme for the fountain or for the courtyards. And there's, other than lighting the building on the exterior, we haven't found a reason to do so, since the building is not in use in the evening. It's a pretty much daytime function. Yes, the legislature does run late on a number of evenings, but interior lights take care of that issue. We haven't chosen to highlight other interior as well as exterior portions of the building for public viewing because the building's not open to the public much past 5 or 5:30 each day. Yes?
What's the pattern going to be on these tiles in the bowl, and who designed it?
The pattern was developed within our office. Our former colleague Tom Casper was very engaged in this up until his death in March of this year, and Matt Hansen and others. We've talked about the tiles will be roughly 3/4 of an inch square. The pattern will be generally the core of the fountain near where the bubbler is will be gold tile, and as the tile goes out toward the rim of the bowl, it will transition into one of the 4 colors that we mentioned earlier: blue, red, so on and so forth. So it will transition from gold at the center in every case to one of the 4 colors at the perimeter, a different perimeter color in each of the 4 courtyards. Yes?
I was wondering, I think a lot of people think, well, this is finishing what was originally designed.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't look like there was all that much designed on how it would work, or, I mean, plumbing technology. Can you kind of, how much of all this was developed by recent?
Sure.
Yeah.
You're correct. We did not have extremely detailed drawings from the Goodhue office on how the fountains were to work, to function, to look. They had done just preliminary drawings, and that's always the way design elements of buildings start. As a concept, then you put a little more detail into them, you start hardlining things, you start deciding where things are going to go, what the finishes will actually be instead of just a suggestion of what they would be. And so it's part of the kind of natural progression of how buildings and elements of buildings evolve as they're being built. They start preliminarily, and of course they can become far more detailed. And so our office took that as part of the process that we were involved in. There are 3 architects in our office at that time, Tom Casper included, and we all sat down and kind of put our heads together, knowing the building as we have come to know it, and basically made our best guess, presuming based on what we see in the Capitol, what the Goodhue office would likely have done. Did we pick the exact colors and everything else? Probably not. We'd have to have those gentlemen here from the 1920s. But we think in concept, we followed what the Goodhue office would ultimately have wanted to evolve into. Good question.
I have two questions. Are the courtyards open now for visitation? And the second question is, do the state senators get paid overtime when they work in the evening?
I'll answer your second question first. Do the senators get paid overtime when they work in the evening? They barely get paid straight time when they're there doing their work all the time. So the best deal we have in state government, and it is, in my personal opinion, an unfortunate circumstance where we have people who work very hard, doing a great deal of work, and do an extremely good job at it, being paid a ridiculously low salary. That's one. Two, your first question, are the fountains open to the public or the courtyards open to the public? Yes, they will be. Between now and dedication day, they will be less open. They will not be probably open during the time we're doing additional work in preparation for the dedication. But prior to starting this project, the courtyards were open. And not many people used them because there wasn't much out there to go see. Now there's a little more of an attraction, so we think they will be a great draw. And so our intent is whenever the building is open to the public, the courtyards will be open as well, except for winter months when there might be snow and ice. Yes, Bob?
So have you designed yet the signs and shelter text that'll say, please do not get in the fountain? Because you're gonna need them.
Signs, that could be. Our experience with operating fountains, the question was, is there going to be any kind of signage directing people on what they may or may not do in the courtyards? I think the average person knows what we'd like them to do, and so we're relying on their discretion to start with, and if there is a problem that develops, we'll have to take measures to adapt to it. Good point.
Also collecting money.
Yeah, sure. We don't mind if there are fountains where people want to throw, $20 gold pieces and those sorts of things in. Not a problem. Yes?
Will there be benches installed in each of the courtyards?
Yes, there will be benches installed in each of the courtyards. There were benches there before we started the project. They were in poor condition, and we will be putting new benches into each. We had 6 benches in each courtyard to begin with. One of these 4 courtyards is accessible through the cafeteria of the Capitol. And so through the cafe, we're evaluating the prospect of putting small tables and chairs on the paved walks themselves so that those who want to go out and maybe have a lunch or a break or whatever in the courtyard have some space and some furniture to do so. That's yet to be determined, but yes, we will have benches there, and our intent is to get people out and have them use the courtyards as much as possible. Any other questions? Yes?
Can the courtyard be used for like receptions, personal type things, a wedding, or that type of thing?
It's going to be the question is, will the courtyard still be available for special events? They will be much more limited, especially once we start putting the landscaping in place, because up till now, the courtyards have kind of been a flat plane, turf onto pavement onto turf. That will no longer be the case. We have a fountain in the center now, and when we put the landscaping back, it will put many vertical obstacles in the way of someone being able to kind of traverse across this as a flat plane. The walks in the courtyards will be available for people to walk. We will not have space for people. There are small areas of turf within this landscape scheme, but it's really not set up for people to go out and do much more than walk on the walks themselves and perhaps use tables and chairs that might be contained within those walk surfaces. I see no more hands. Bless your hearts. Thank you all for being here. Yes, Diana, one last?
I just wanted to say, great job, Bob. I've heard you do variations of this 100 times, and I still learned something today, so great job.
Well, good. I take that very kindly from a former legislator. Thank you.